fire when the mics get wet. Blow up mindset, no regrets. Welcome to the Natasha Effect.
Welcome back to the Natasha Effect, everyone. And I just wanted to talk about something today that has kind of been on my mind a lot, which is power and leadership, which makes Danielle the perfect guest for today. Most people think that leadership is about being the one in control. However, if you really look at it, it's about how others respond to you and how you respond to other people. It's about presence, it's about feeling safe, it's about the overall energy you present. And if you think about it, that's how we define a leader, that good leadership, bad leadership. And what's interesting is some of the clearest examples don't come from people at all. Yes, we have great leaders and we have terrible ones, and I'm sure we can all list a few of those. But a lot of the time it's found right here in nature. And Danielle's going to explain that for us. From how I understand, Danielle McKinnon is the founder of Eat, Sleep, and Ride and Herd Dynamics, where she studies leadership through the lens of herd behavior, specifically horses, which is super unique and super cool. And I cannot wait to talk to you about that. Essentially, she translates humans to horses and horses back to humans. So I'll let her explain more on that. But Danielle, welcome to the Natasha Effect. I am the host, Natasha, and I can't wait to get started. So if I were to meet you for the first time and I'm like, hey, Danielle, my name is Natasha. What is it that you do? What is it that you do?
Yeah, so my name's Danielle McKinnon. I suppose my story started a long time before I started translating horse language into human behavior. I started off working with horses from a young age when I found things like school really challenging, and my home life was really difficult, and I was diagnosed with ADHD. So there were lots of challenges in terms of me, I suppose, trying to get into education, understand how to be present, to actually want to learn with lots of other things going on in my environment. So horses became a catalyst for me at a really young age to get up every day, no matter how hard everything was, to be empathetic, no matter how difficult life was around you, and just to learn how to show up. And from these opportunities with horses, it grew into me starting a career horrifically. So it started with sort of basic horse riding and becoming a coach, traveling around the world. So I went around Inner Mongolia when I was in my 20s and lived with nomads and rode a horse across the Genghis Khan Trail. That then translated into working for the Brazilian Olympic team in my late 20s, getting my qualifications to be a British Horse Society instructor. But throughout all of this time, I realised that a lot of the learnings I have was we were learning what to do to horses to make them perform for us. So we would do these exams to say, oh, what does this thing do? So, for example, what bit would you put in a horse if the horse was too strong? So it's little things like that over the years that I thought, what is it we're actually learning here? We're learning how to kind of make this animal do something for us or how to conform. But the learning that I'd had with the animal was actually what I learned about myself and how that animal made me feel and how I could recognize how I showed up each day in the world. So I started to kind of delve deeper into alternative methods or communication with horses. And that led me down a journey to working with a French riding school, which is all about balance and posture and lightness. So looking at the biomechanics and the actual physiology of horses, and are we actually asking them to perform and they're not actually able to do so because how they're made up. The same with what we do with people. That then moved on to me training as an NLP coach because I realized when I was working with people, we have so many inhibiting beliefs. And actually, how could we go around reframing those beliefs so we could have better conversations with horses and our clients? And that then led on down another rabbit hole of looking at facial behaviors in horses. So actually studying facial behaviors to determine pain and using an ethogram methodology, which then led me on to starting my first business, which was a rehab business. So working with behavioral problems, horses that were sort of last chance saloon. As I began that work, I realized that the horses were never, we use these terms naughty, we use it with people as well, don't we? And a horse is never naughty, it's just trying to communicate in the best way it can. And it doesn't have, a language like we do. So it can only move, fight, freeze, run, because that's its language. And we're trying to have a conversation energetically, and the horse is trying to figure out also from us what we're asking from them. So this kind of then combines all of this together. I went, okay, so how do I take these learnings that's helped me, it's gotten me out of a situation from, being in a homeless hostel, being in care, not gaining any qualifications at school, to being in my early 30s and gaining my British Horse Society Stage 4, an undergrad in equine facilitated learning, an NLP qualification, and a leadership training qualification. I thought all these learnings have come from horses. And when you're the cared for child, it's really hard to get a shot on someone's horse. So to get to that level was really difficult for me because nobody wants that person on your horse. And it's really difficult, to put on a face when your whole world is crumbling around you. And actually also trying to keep that installation or to keep that belief that your past doesn't define your future. But historically in humans we tend to sectionalize people. So there was always a challenge, but the horses kept me going and they gave me a focus. And then from that, I thought actually what I really want to do is I want to give people the chance to experience, time with horses. And how do I do that? And then became the idea of setting up Eat Sleep Rides. So it became a community riding school with the kind of initial idea was to provide equine interactions to rurally isolated communities because of where we're based. And where we are in Scotland, we don't have a bus or, we have 2 buses a day. We don't have a shop where we are. We have very limited services, quite low economic opportunities. And, I remember when I started, 7 years ago with the business, young people would say to me, well, we're either clever enough to leave or we get pregnant and we get a house. So it became really clear the divide, if young people didn't stay in the area. So we actually weren't, bolstering the local economy. We weren't actually understanding the needs of the families around and what they needed so they could actually, open themselves up to opportunity and become creative to find clarity. So I set up Eat Sleep Rides and we started off with 1 pony in a rented barn 7 years ago and £50. And I remember that barn, it was an old cattle barn and we didn't even have a table. We had like a bit of wood and 2 props to put the folder on. People came in for a lesson. And then 2 years moved on from there. And actually I realized that people were coming to interact with horses for various reasons. So that could have been for their mental health, that could have been to, work towards employability, to gain volunteering hours, as an alternative education to actually a schooling system, which then allowed me to start thinking about how do we accredit people, in this industry. So I started to look at youth awards for young people so they could actually direct their own learning but gain a qualification of excellence, which allowed them to actually still attend college or, higher university without actually having to have gone through a regimented schooling system. And actually what families were coming in and how we could look at how we could signpost them effectively if they were struggling with like financial needs or sort of fuel poverty. And then on top of that, how do we actually use our partnership bodies? Because throughout that time I started to connect with, national bodies like Youth Scotland or local TSI. So how do we then actually start to give opportunities to communities and how do we start to, use funding, I suppose, smartly, so we were able to provide events and opportunities that people could come to free of charge that were accessible. So then that led us on to 4 years ago, we took on a landfill site. Some days I do wonder why I decided to take on a landfill site, and we
Like,
we
why
built
did
our
I
own.
do that?
Yeah, so broken people and animals, and then a landfill site. Yeah, it was a bit of a turning point in my life. We were given the lease for the site a week before COVID hit, and then
Oh,
Brexit
wow.
came the week after. So we'd kind of costed out this build at 220,000, but within 3 weeks we went over to 500,000 because of Brexit and COVID. So it was a real challenge because we don't have any electricity at our site, so we're completely off grid. So it wasn't just a case of, we got this site, it was a case of removing 3.5 Arctic tons worth of rubbish, 900 bags of ragwort. We worked out that we delivered 2,435 volunteering hours. We had 90 community members. So it was a real push from the community to get onto this site. And that included, putting in stables, a barn, an arena, a porta cabin. And that's just what we started with. And then over time it grew again, and that came to having 2 yurts, a garden, chickens, a growing space, a biofuel project. Because the reality was we were creating an environment for the horses, and we were learning from the horses all the time. So, for example, the biofuel, what can we do with the horse manure? Why are we paying to have this taken away when we could actually do something innovative with it and support fuel poverty? So all the things that happened in these spaces happened around the horses' needs. And then throughout that time, I realised that even though I had my undergrads in equine assisted development, what I saw a lot of what was happening was, people saying, "Oh, let's come and do equine therapy." I realised quite early on that from my past, I didn't want to go down the therapy route. It was too triggering for me, especially cases of sort of sexual or physical abuse or drug and alcohol addiction. So anytime I did run therapeutic programs, it would be with a counsellor. And anytime I provided any sort of therapeutic interaction, it was about teaching people to think forward and using the NLP modalities that I'd trained in. And that then led me to find Teaching Horse, which is an American based company. And that's when I started my journey to North Carolina 2 years ago. So I learned to essentially Teaching Horse, teaching people to be more like horses. So it's a framework that uses the concept of herd dynamics, so how horses move within a herd and how we can apply that to human behavior. So horses, for example, they lead from different positions. So we have a very sort of man with a cigar approach. If you look at management in big companies, it's management, 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 top down, top down, top down. So we're constantly removing accountability from self. And we're not actually listening to our team and figuring out where are they best placed to make decisions. Whereas when a horse moves, even though they have a social hierarchy in the field, so they still have play. Actually, they're one of the only mammals that still play into, I suppose, their teens, or actually till they're not really. I mean, my 32-year-old pony still runs around playing with the young ponies. So it's something that they consistently exhibit. Actually, when they move in a diamond shape. So they have someone from the front, so they have the lead mare. They have someone at the back, which can normally be the back stallion, although we have gender neutral herds now because we don't have stallions. And they would be driving, well, they would be creating the energy that's needed to move the herd. The lead mare is set in direction. And then they have sentinels at either side who essentially keep the herd safe in movement. And they also welcome in other herd members. And they're also the first to notice if somebody was to, come into a horse's space. So in movement, they recognize that they are better together. And humans, if we were to look at COVID, is a perfect example. That's not what we did. So we sectionalized groups of people. So we had young people, disabled people, old people, and they were all given a kind of different
Very
framework.
separated, yeah.
Not what horses do at all. And horses, have capabilities that humans have. But, I think I always say to people, you go to school, you learn how to pay your council tax so you can pay your taxes, and you learn how to be incongruent because it's knocked out of you because you're in a trauma inducing system which is pass or fail. Whereas horses, they embrace confusion because infusion actually comes to creativity and supports clarity. And horses have different levels of attention. So horses have levels of attention on self, others, and their environment. Whereas if you look at the amount of people that are in hospital from trips and falls, because actually we're pretty crap at paying attention to our environment. And then when we do pay attention to self, it's in head. So we don't actually recognize those mental feelings that we actually have a physical connotation because we're not taught that. So we never actually can anchor to a feeling because we want to get it out of our heads rather than embrace it through our body. And horses, they communicate through energy. So we're particularly not good at recognizing energy because we spend a lot of time thinking or talking or writing a list and trying to cross that off. But that doesn't give you time to just be in your body, to be present and actually notice what's going on with you. So it's these capabilities and also this concept of congruence. When a horse does something, they mean it. They're not like, oh, I'm going to do that thing for a bit of fun and then we'll hide round the corner and then we'll laugh at that other horse. They do it because they mean it and it's a response to their environment. Whereas, I always think when you're little, there's times people remember, when your parents said to you or whoever was your caregiver, oh, everything's fine, but you knew instinctively it wasn't. And they're kind of knocked out of us from a young age because young people are more receptive because they still work on instinct. whether
Right.
they can actually, you know, convert that to words, you can actually see in a child's body language how they actually feel about a situation before they have to talk about it. So
Mhm.
that's the general, I suppose, the framework of herd dynamics. I don't know if that was quite a long-winded answer, but I kind of felt I
No,
probably
it's
needed a little
okay.
bit of an
It's definitely
explanation as to how.
definitely a lot and definitely a long journey to get where you are, but like you said, you had your ups and downs, and I'm sure, or I can guess, you're super happy about where you're at right now and where you're going. And I'm excited to hear more and see kind of where you go. You said a few things that I wrote down that stuck out to me, so I just want to go back to those. Um, I think one of the biggest key points you hit on is that we as human beings remove self accountability. Um, and that's a really great way to point it out or to look at it. I hadn't thought about it that way
Yeah.
because, like you said, the way our management is set up, and even I'm in the military, so that happens a lot. It's always, especially being a sergeant in the military,
Oh my goodness.
if my soldiers mess up, it's my fault.
Yeah.
Like, they can mess up all day long, and but at the end of the day, whoever is in charge of me, I have to answer to them because I should have trained them better, or I should have corrected it, or what have you. So now these soldiers aren't really taking self accountability, like you said, and that can be used in anywhere in the corporate world
Yeah.
or really anywhere in life. So I thought that was a really interesting point. And then kind of sticking with the military aspect as well. You mentioned diamond formation, and I thought that was really interesting. That's one of the formations we use in the military. Like
Okay. I know you use
obviously
the,
not. Yeah,
yeah.
just the way they would form up. Not It's not as used. It's more of like a battlefield maneuver or like a strategic maneuver, like a wedge, a line, or a diamond. Obviously done for very different reasons, but kind of the same high points you mentioned, being able to change direction quickly, being able to see what's at each point of the formation,
Yep.
being able to notice those changes if someone's coming from this side or the front or the back. And you have those people who are in charge who are at those points. So I think that there's a lot of overlap between even just military foundations and herd dynamics, I
Yep.
guess, because that's really what, if you want to put it down and dirty, that's what the military is. It's a herd. So I think that's why
Yep.
it's really good at what it does, is just how we operate, is because we operate as a herd and we don't operate as individuals. So I thought
It's,
those are two
it's
very
in,
interesting points.
that's interesting because I was quite fascinated when I was looking at psychology with the army. So it's interesting you say that. So order theory was something I looked at a lot in my NLP. Because I remember when I started doing my NLP, we talked alongside that, I was doing my trauma informed training. So it talks about, our jails and our NHS or in
Yeah.
your neck of the woods, healthcare if you can afford it, I suppose.
Yeah.
It talks about, yeah, we're full of, people are not taking accountability. And it sounds like you're sort of it's not a damaging statement, it's because people aren't taught to. So it's not that I think people consciously do it. I think we
Yeah.
just have a reason to say, well, this is what, and we can blame this and we can blame that. And then, if you take it politically, we have parties trying to fight against each other. So there's constant reasons to go, well, that happened because of that party, or this happened because of that. There's not a joined up approach to anything. But the army really interested me because they used the concept of order theory, which is
Mhm.
exactly what you've just said there, which is they did they did studies on infantry soldiers, and they were trying to understand the psychology, I suppose, between being given an order that could potentially cause death or injury to someone else. And actually, a lot of the responses are, well, that's my order. But that order is passed up and passed up. So, like you
Yeah.
say, you're in charge, but someone else is in charge of you. Someone else is in charge of them. Someone else is in charge of them.
Everyone always has a boss or someone to answer to.
Yeah. So I think as a unit, like you say, I think I've worked with soldiers. I worked with Help for Heroes campaign when I was down south. So they rode a World War I horse wagon from John O'Groats to Land's End. I
Mhm.
think they had about 4 limbs between them. They were great guys. And it was supporting that campaign, and people come back. back from the war. And actually, the infantry or the groups that we work with, they were so connected because, like you say, you're moving together and you're having to look out for one another. But it's where the order theory happens after that. But actually, the groups of soldiers were so
Mhm.
connected and supportive of each other and recognized exactly how to look out for one another.
And I think that's because from day one or day zero, we'll even say, when you get in basic training, it's a um oh, what's the word for it? It's never a one person problem. If I mess up,
Yeah,
everybody is punished. If someone forgot part of their uniform, we're all doing push-ups. It was never like individual punishment. And so
yeah,
you learn to you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if
yeah,
you better get that weakest soldier up to par, or you are going to be constantly
yeah,
miserable having to pay for their mistakes. So I think it teaches leadership in that way as well, of like you have
yeah.
to take care of the people beneath you or you're also going to suffer. And a lot of times that's how herds operate. They take care of the smallest ones because that's going to be who gets them killed in terms of like
And they
wildlife and
convene.
things like
Well, yeah, so horses, they convene, they're young and they're vulnerable in movement exactly like that because they recognize that they're a danger to the herd. Interestingly, with horses in the wild, if a member couldn't keep up, that horse would be left.
that. Right.
And that's where I think the change with human is because they recognize for the greater goods, in movement because they're not able to keep up with the herd. And that is natural. And that is we could look because I suppose we could draw concepts on lots of different, herds of animals, and geese are another good concept, the way that they fly and how they take it in turns to move up the rank to lead
Mhm.
so they can sleep. And if you've ever seen a line of birds, lie on a rooftop or a line, you'll
Yeah.
notice one's nodding off and other one's keeping. So, nature is smart. It recognizes what's needed
Right.
for the good of the community or the section as a whole. And I think that's why I love the concept of biomimicry, because I recognize that nature has so much to learn. And the army, I've watched loads of amazing things just on how they've developed, underwater cameras through kingfishers' eyes, really cool things that they've used nature
Mhm.
for a lot of, like you say, strategic formations, but actually just technology.
Yeah.
I've been really
It really
interested in
is. Like nature is an amazing thing, but it is a dog eat dog world. So at the end of the day, it does have its vicious cycles. And that's just because, like you said, they identify that it's for the greater good. Um,
that.
you said something else too that really stuck with me, and that was that said horses are usually right. Um, and I think that's interesting because I feel like you touched on it a little bit. We as human beings tend to overthink everything. Like you said, for them, it's just very instinctual to do something and they do it because they mean it. But human beings, we just overthink everything. So what do you think it is that the horses, or I guess that herd mentality, is picking up on that we as human beings or people, like what is it that we completely miss that they're able to pick up on?
Yeah. So I think for horses, the goal is, the health and the harmony of their herds for starters. So, they're going to instinctively respond to stimuli. Mainly, and the way I keep my horses is they are a herd. So I will notice it in time. So, for example, when we've had a storm, we've had pretty bad weather here. We're right on the coast. And you'll
Mhm.
see horses that don't particularly get on, and I know they don't in a hierarchy. They can always see each other, but how they create a formation to keep each other safe in movements. They essentially create a windbreak through their bodies. Now that's instinctively something they do because they go, okay, well, actually, how are we going to get safe passage? How are we going to stay warm? How are we going to use our reserves, efficiently and effectively? So actually people within the herd can rest. I think for humans, and I'm using that analogy, we're like, oh my God, we might need to go and buy 500 rolls of toilet paper because someone's put something on TikTok, Sorry, I use that all the time because it drives me
I'm
bonkers.
just laughing because it's so accurate, especially like in Florida during hurricane season. You can't find water and you can't find toilet paper. And it's like, and gas is it's just crazy to me because why do you need to overbuy all these things, especially when it's a common hurricane season happens every year. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
and every year
yeah.
people
You're
dump
not
on
just
it. You do
learning
the
about it.
same
Yeah,
thing over and
yeah,
over again.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, for humans that are overthinkers, the reality is you have a lot of time to prep. Now you don't know how severe the hurricane's going to be, but you're
Yeah.
aware it's going to happen. So actually, even despite that preparation time, humans instinctively rush out, to protect probably their own individual herd. It'll be their family. But
Hmm.
rather than thinking, okay, there's 10 houses in my neighborhood. Could we, I don't know, have a kitty, something as silly as that, where we actually protect, 15 houses on the street and we group people together so we are in a bigger herd. But instinctively, this is, I think, where
Everyone just
humans
protects
are,
their own home. Yeah.
well, yeah, and we're beautifully brilliant. Humans, our IQ level is amazing, but we're innately selfish. Because that's been, and I think, if you think about years ago, I don't know how it was in the States, but for us, I remember someone complaining a while ago about horse poo being on the road. But if I go back to World War I, I think, well, you used to ride horses down the road and everyone would come out with their shovels and put it on their roses. So they were innately part of society. And I
Hmm.
think, we wouldn't actually have roads. I mean, I understand the Romans and the Vikings conquered, they did this, but they had animals to travel. So we wouldn't
Yeah.
have had communication lines. We wouldn't have had someone to pull our artillery or horses. We wouldn't have had food. We wouldn't have been able to plough our fields. So instinctively, humans over time, we've forgotten the legacy of the teachings from horse and other things as well. But, I mean, I talk about horses, that's my thing. But we instinctively forget about the legacy of what they gave to us and what we can still learn from them. And it turns into a commodity. And we live in a society now of, buy, 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 fast, fast, fast. Things are commodities, we have trends, we have phases, we're in and out of them. And community's been kind of stripped away, which is where I feel community groups like myself and other groups that I work with, I suppose we're the heart of trying to get that connectedness because we really believe in that grassroots level of voices being heard and voices coming together, but also, giving people platform to be represented, but also saying actually you have to take accountability. We did a session once with a group of women. It was a program with women who were leaving the justice system. And one of the sessions, and it was actually in tandem with my American coaches, was on community and the impact when you remove yourself. Now, a lot of people we work with say, I don't like people. I don't really want to hang around. I don't know what's going on. But actually, when you remove yourself from community, you're doing a just justice to yourself and you're also impacting that community because you've got no idea what's going on. So you've got no idea who
Yeah.
might need help, who might give you an opportunity. If you remove that from yourself, and that's something else we do, whereas horses don't do that because instinctively they recognize they need their community to be safe.
Yeah. And that's, I'm glad you kind of said that is because I think that's something that a lot of people misunderstand about leadership itself and community is that people think that someone is a leader or someone who is a leader, it's all about like being super dominant or being in control or just being in charge of whatever it is, which yes, that's part of it. However, from what I understand, from what you've said, from what I've read, from her dynamics, it's about safety. And you kind of just touched on that with the storm analogy and things like that. It's about like that stability aspect. And so if you strip everything else away, what is actually making them that leader?
Yep.
And I think it's exactly what you kind of touched on is that sense of safety. Do I feel safe with this person? And you can't feel, I guess you can by yourself. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, but you're ultimately going to feel safer in a community with a leader that you trust that has those other qualities.
So I think one thing I always say is that, when I talk about shared leadership, it sounds quite progressive and modern and generous, but, in practice, it's much slower, it's much more uncomfortable, and it's far more demanding than control. And I think people, well, it's far more demanding than being in control.
Yeah.
I think people say they want collaboration, but I'm not entirely sure they understand that. I think what people really want is agreement. I think that's an easier word for people to digest. And I think sometimes it's about, removing the buzzwords and like, like what we're having just now, a conversation where you can kind of actually align it to real-time experiences, to actual conversations that make sense to someone in the normal world, because
Yeah.
everyone's a leader in their own right, whether that's to themselves or, within a family unit. And you can take the concepts of what we do with horses, personally and professionally. It doesn't need to be, in a context where someone is running something or being in control. I think we all need to learn to take some sort of leadership role in our own life.
Mhm. I think that's a
Um,
huge thing people
yeah,
struggle with is doing that, and even back to the self accountability aspect. I think that stems from as early as childhood, because if you think about it, your parents are always taking the accountability for you.
Natasha Effect, yeah, the vibe is set. Truth gets louder when the mics get wet. Glow up mindset, no regrets. Welcome to the Natasha Effect.